Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, May 21st, 1960. Day of death, November 28th, 1994. Also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who killed and dismembered 17 males between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. Although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorder, Dahmer was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1982. Dahmer was later sentenced to life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institute. Before we start talking about Jeffrey Dahmer and all the horrible murders he committed, we must talk about his childhood. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the first of two sons to Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a Marquette University chemistry student, and later a research chemist, and Joyce Annette Dahmer, an instructor. Some sources report Dahmer was deprived of attention as an infant. Other sources, however, suggest that Dahmer was generally doted upon as an infant and toddler by both parents, although his mother was known to be tense, greedy for both attention and pity, and argumentative with her husband and her neighbours. As Dahmer entered first grade, Lionel's studies kept him away from home much of the time. When he was home, his wife, a hypochondriac who suffered from depression, demanded constant attention and spent an increasing amount of time in bed. On one occasion, she attempted suicide using Equinol. Consequently, neither parent devoted much time for their son. Jeffrey felt unsure of the solidarity of the family, recalling extreme tension and numerous arguments between his parents during his early years. Jeffrey had been an energetic and happy child, but became notably subdued after double hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday. At school, Jeffrey was regarded as quiet and timid. One teacher recalled she detected early signs of abandonment due to his father's absence and mother's illness, the symptoms of which increased when she became pregnant with her second child. In school, Dahmer had a small number of friends. From an early age, Jeffrey manifested an interest in dead animals. His fascination with dead animals may have begun when, at the age of 4, he saw his father removing animal bones from beneath the family home. According to Lionel, Jeffrey was oddly thrilled by the sound of the bones made and became preoccupied with animal bones, which he initially called his fiddlesticks. He occasionally searched beneath and around the family home for additional bones and explored the bodies of live animals to discover where their bones were located. In May 1968, the family moved to Bath Township, Summit County, Ohio. This address was their third in 3 years and the Dahmers' 6th address since marriage. The home stood in 1.5 acres of woodland with a small hut only a short walk from the house, where Jeffrey began collecting large insects and the skeletons of small animals, such as chipmunks and squirrels. 2 years later, during a chicken dinner, Jeffrey asked Lionel what would happen if the chicken bones were placed in bleach. Lionel, pleased by what he believed to be his son's scientific curiosity, demonstrated how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. Jeffrey incorporated these preserving techniques into his bone collecting. He also began collecting dead animals, including roadkill, which he would dissect and bury beside the hut. From his freshman year at Revere High School, Jeffrey Dahmer was seen as an outcast. By age 14, he had begun drinking beer and hard alcohol by the daylight hours, frequently concealing his liquor inside his jacket he wore to school. Jeffrey mentioned to one classmate who inquired why he was drinking scotch so early in the morning. Jeffrey replied with, "It's my medicine." Although largely uncommunicative in his freshman year, Jeffrey was seen by staff as polite and highly intelligent, but with average grades. He was a competitive tennis player and played briefly in the high school band. When Jeffrey reached puberty, he discovered he was gay. He did not tell his parents, and in his early teens, he had a brief relationship with another teenage boy. Although they never had intercourse, by Dahmer's admission, he began fantasizing about dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner in his early to mid-teens. When he was about 16, Jeffrey Dahmer conceived a fancy of rendering unconscious a particular male jogger he found attractive and then making sexual use of his body. On one occasion, Dahmer concealed himself in the bushes with a baseball bat to lie in wait for this man. However, the jogger did not pass by on that particular day. Jeffrey Dahmer later admitted this was his first attempt to attack and render an individual submissive to him. Jeffrey Dahmer was seen by his high school peers as a class clown who often staged pranks which become known as doing a Dahmer. These included bleating and simulating epileptic seizures or cerebral palsy. At school and local stores, occasionally, Dahmer would perform these antics for money to purchase alcohol. By 1977, Jeffrey Dahmer's grades had declined. His parents hired a private tutor with limited success. That same year, in an attempt to save their marriage, his parents attended counselling. They continued to quarrel frequently. When Lionel discovered Joyce had engaged in a brief affair in September 1977, they decided to divorce, telling their sons they wished to do so amicably. The process of their divorce soon became increasingly bitter, and Lionel moved out of the house in early 1978, temporarily residing in a motel on North Cleveland. In May 1978, Jeffrey graduated from high school. A few weeks before his graduation, one of his teachers observed Dahmer sitting close to the school parking lot, drinking several cans of beer. When the teacher threatened to report the matter, Dahmer informed him he was experiencing a lot of problems at home and that the school's guidance counsellor was aware of them. A court order, and without informing Lionel, moved out of the family home with David to live with relatives. Jeffrey had just turned 18 and remained in the family home. Dahmer's parents' divorce was finalised on July 24, 1978, and Joyce was awarded custody of her younger son. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978, 3 weeks after his graduation. On June the 18th, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was almost 19. Dahmer lured Hicks to his house on the pretext of drinking. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert at Lake Park, Ohio, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house upon the promise of a few beers. Stephen Hicks and Jeffrey Dahmer started doing the workout using dumbbells. According to Dahmer, the sight of the bare-chested Hicks standing at the roadside stirred his sexual feelings. Although, when Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes he made would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave. And I didn't want him to leave, said Dahmer. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound, 4.5 kg dumbbell. He later stated he struck Hicks twice from behind with the dumbbell as Hicks sat upon a chair. When Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell, then stripped the clothes from Hicks' body before exploring his chest with his hands, then masturbating as he stood above the corpse. Hours later, Dahmer dragged the body to the basement. The following day, Dahmer dissected Hicks' body in the basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and pared the flesh from his bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woodland behind the family home. Hicks's necklace and the knife used to dismember him were thrown from the West Bath Road Bridge into the river. In January 1979, on his father's urging, Jeffrey Dahmer enlisted in the United States Army. He underwent basic training at Fort McClellan in Anniston, Alabama, before training as a medical specialist at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. He was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication while stationed at Fort Sam Houston. On July 13th, 1979, Jeffrey Dahmer was deployed to Baumholder, West Germany, where he served as a combat medic in the 2nd Battalion, 68th Armoured Regiment, 8th Infantry Division. According to published reports, in Dahmer's first year of service, he was an average or slightly above average soldier. Owing to Jeffrey Dahmer's alcohol abuse, his performance deteriorated, and in March 1981, he was deemed unsuitable for military service and was later discharged from the army. He received an honourable discharge as his superiors did not believe that any problems Dahmer had in the army would be applicable to civilian life. On March 24, 1981, Jeffrey Dahmer was sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for debriefing and provided with a plane ticket to travel anywhere in the country. Jeffrey Dahmer later told police he felt he could not return home to face his father, so he opted to travel to Miami Beach, Florida, both because he was tired of the cold and secondly in an attempt to live by his own means. In Florida, Dahmer found a job at a deli and rented a room in a nearby motel. He spent most of his salary on alcohol and was soon evicted from the motel for non-payment. Dahmer initially spent his evenings on the beach as he continued to work at the sandwich shop until phoning his father and asking to return to Ohio in September of the same year. After his return to Ohio, Dahmer initially lived with his father and stepmother and insisted on being delegated numerous chores to occupy his time where he looked for work. He continued to drink heavily and 2 weeks after his return was arrested for drunken disorderly conduct. He was fined $60 and given a suspended 10-day jail sentence. Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, tried unsuccessfully to wean his son off alcohol. In December 1981, he and Dahmer's stepmother sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis. Dahmer's grandmother was the only family member to whom Dahmer displayed any affection. They hoped that her influence, plus the change of location, might persuade Dahmer to quit drinking, find a job, and live responsibly. Initially, Jeffrey's living arrangements with his grandmother were harmonious. He accompanied her to church willingly, undertook chores, actively sought work, and abided by most of the house rules, although he continued to drink and smoke. In early 1982, he found employment as a phlebotomist at the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center. He held this job for a total of 10 months before being laid off. Jeffrey Dahmer remained unemployed for over 2 years, during which he lived upon whatever money his grandmother gave him. Shortly before losing his job, Jeffrey was arrested for indecent exposure on August 8, 1982, at Wisconsin State Fair Park. He was observed expose himself on the south side of the Coliseum, in which 25 people were present, including women and children. For this incident, he was convicted and fined $50 plus court cost. In January 1985, Jeffrey Dahmer was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 6 nights per week, with Saturday evenings off. Shortly after he found this job, an incident occurred in which Dahmer was propositioned by another man while reading in the West Allis Public Library. The stranger threw Dahmer a note offering to perform oral sex upon him. Although Dahmer did not respond to this proposition, the incident stirred in his mind the fantasies of control and dominance he had developed as a teenager, and he began to familiarize himself with Milwaukee's gay bars, gay bathhouses, and bookstores. He also stole a male mannequin from a store, which he briefly used for sexual stimulation until his grandmother discovered the item, stored in his closet, and demanded that he discard it. By late 1985, Jeffrey Dahmer had begun to regularly frequent the bathhouses, which he later described as being relaxing places. But during his sexual encounters, he became frustrated at his partners moving during the act. Following his arrest, he stated, I trained myself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of people. For this reason, beginning in June 1986, he administered sleeping pills to his partners, giving them liquor laced with sedatives. He then waited for his partner to fall asleep before performing various sexual acts. To maintain an adequate supply of this medication, Jeffrey Dahmer informed doctors he worked nights and required the tablets to adjust to the schedule. After approximately 12 such instances, the bathhouse's administration revoked Jeffrey Dahmer's membership and began to use the hotel rooms to continue his practice. On September 8, 1986, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested upon a charge of lewd and lascivious behaviour for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys as he stood close to the river. He initially claimed he had merely been urinating, unaware that they were witnesses, but soon admitted the offence. The charge was changed to disorderly conduct, and on March 10, 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year of probation with additional instructions to undergo counselling. On November 20th, 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer, at the time of residing with his grandmother in West Allis, encountered a 25-year-old man from Michigan named Stephen Tuami at a bar and persuaded him to return to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Jeffrey had rented a room for the evening. According to Dahmer, he had no intention of killing Stephen, but intended to simply drug him and lie beside him as he explored his body. The following morning, Jeffrey Dahmer awoke to find Stephen lying beneath him on the bed, his chest crushed in and black and blue with bruises. Blood was sweeping from the corner of his mouth, and Jeffrey's fist and one forearm were extensively bruised. Jeffrey Dahmer later said he had no memory of killing Stephen, and that he could not believe this had happened. Jeffrey Dahmer purchased a large suitcase in which he transported Stephen Tuami's body to his grandmother's residence. 1 week later, he severed the head, arms and legs, then filtered the bones from the body before cutting the flesh into pieces small enough to handle. Jeffrey Dahmer placed the flesh inside plastic garbage bags. He wrapped the bones inside a sheet and panned them into splinters with a sledgehammer. The dismemberment process took Dahmer approximately 2 hours. He disposed of all of Stephen's remains, excluding the head, in the trash. For 2 weeks, following Tuami's killing, Jeffrey Dahmer retained Tuami's head, wrapped in a blanket. After 2 weeks, Dahmer boiled the head in a mixture of Silax, an alkali-based industrial detergent, and bleach, in an effort to retain the skull, which he then used to stimulate for masturbation. Eventually, the skull became too brittle by this bleaching process, so Dahmer pulverized it and disposed of it. According to Jeffrey Dahmer, Stephen Tuami's murder was a pivotal incident, after which he did not try to control his compulsions. He began to actively seek victims, most of whom he encountered in or around gay bars, and would typically lure them to his grandmother's home. He would drug his victims with sleeping pills before or shortly after engaging in sexual activity with them. Once his victim was unconscious, he strangled them to death. 2 months after the killing of Stephen, Jeffrey Dahmer encountered a 14-year-old Native American prostitute, James Dictator. Dahmer lured him to his grandmother's residence with an offer of $50 to pose for nude pictures. They engaged in sexual activity before Dahmer drugged James and strangled him on the floor of the cellar. Jeffrey Dahmer left the body in the cellar for 1 week before dismembering it in the same manner he did with Stephen. He placed all of James's remains, excluding the skull, in the trash. The skull was boiled and cleansed in bleach before Dahmer found that it too had been rendered brittle by the process. He pulverized the skull 2 weeks later. On March 24th, 1988, Jeffrey met a 22-year-old bisexual man, Richard Guerrero, outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. Dahmer lured Guerrero to his grandmother's residence, offering him $50 to spend the night with him. He drugged Guerrero with sleeping pills, strangled him with a leather strap, and filleted the corpse. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body within 24 hours, again disposing of the remains in the trash and retaining the skull before destroying it several months later. On April 23rd, Jeffrey Dahmer lured Ronald Flowers Jr. to his house. However, after giving Flowers a drugged coffee, both he and Flowers heard Dahmer's grandmother call, "Is that you, Jeff?" Although Dahmer replied in a manner that led his grandmother to believe he was alone, she observed that he was not alone. Because of this, Dahmer was unable to kill Flowers, instead waiting until he had become unconscious before taking him to the County General Hospital. In September 1988, Jeffrey Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out, largely because of his drinking, his habit of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the foul smells emanating from the basement and the garage. Dahmer found a one-bedroom apartment at 808 North 24th Street and moved into his new residence on September 25th. 2 days later, he was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy whom he had lured to his home on the pretext of posing nude for photographs. Lionel hired an attorney named Gerald Boyle to defend his son. At Boyle's request, Dahmer underwent serious psychological evaluations prior to his court hearings. The evaluations found that Dahmer harbored deep feelings of alienation. A second evaluation 2 months later revealed Dahmer to be an impulsive individual, suspicious of others, and dismayed by his lack of accomplishments in life. His probation officer also referenced a 1987 diagnosis of Dahmer's suffering from a schizoid personality disorder for presentation to the courts. On January 30th, 1989, Jeffrey Dahmer pleaded guilty to the charges of second-degree sexual assault and of enticing a child for immoral purposes. Sentencing was suspended until May. On March 20th, Dahmer commenced a 10-day Easter absence from work, during which he moved back into his grandmother's home. 2 months after his conviction and 2 months prior to his sentencing, Dahmer murdered his fifth victim, a 24-year-old mixed-race aspiring model, Anthony Sears, whom he met at a gay bar on March 25, 1989. According to Dahmer, on this particular occasion, he was not looking to commit a crime. However, shortly before closing time, that eventually Sears just started talking to me. Dahmer lured Sears to his grandmother's home, where the pair engaged in oral sex, before Dahmer drugged and strangled Sears. The following morning, Jeffrey placed the corpse in his grandmother's bathtub, where he decapitated the body before attempting to flay the corpse. He stripped the flesh from the body and pulverized bones, which he disposed of in the trash. According to Dahmer, he found Sears exceptionally attractive, and Sears was the first victim from whom he permanently retained any body parts. He preserved Sears' head and genitalia in acetone and stored them in a wooden box. Jeffrey then took the wooden box and placed it into his work locker. When he moved to his new address the following year, he took the remains there. On May 23rd, 1989, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in the House of Correction, with work release permitted so he could keep his job. He was also required to register as a sex offender. 2 months before his scheduled release, Dahmer was paroled from his regiment. His 5 years probation imposed in 1989 began at this point. Dahmer temporarily moved back to his grandmother's home in West Alice. On May 14th, 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved out of his grandmother's house and into 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, taking Sears' mummified head and genitals with him. Although located in a high-crime area, Dahmer's new apartment was close to his workplace. Within 1 week of his move into his address, Dahmer killed his sixth victim, Raymond Smith. Smith was a 30-year-old prostitute whom Dahmer lured to his apartment with the promise of $50 for sex. Inside the apartment, he gave Smith a drink laced with 7 sleeping pills that manually strangled him.